The United Nations just launched a planetary defense exercise targeting 3I Atlas. New images show a tail stretching 5 million kilometers, and Professor Avi Loeb just identified what he's calling the 12th anomaly.
The new images of 3I Atlas just flipped the whole situation into straight emergency mode, and now the United Nations is jumping in with a planetary defense mission that has never been used on something coming from another star. The fresh visuals show a tail stretching almost 5 million kilometers long, plus an anti-tail shooting back toward the sun like some kind of cosmic warning sign. None of this matches what a normal comet is supposed to do, and the size alone hints at a force way stronger than simple melting ice. Now that the UN stepped in, the entire conversation has changed. If this is only the early stage, what on earth are the next measurements going to show? This whole move signals that 3I Atlas is no longer just some pretty light in the sky. It's officially a situation the world wants eyes on. The United Nations planetary defense exercise marks a major turning point because it shows how seriously they're taking this thing. The International Asteroid Warning Network rolled out a full-scale observation campaign running from late November 2025 all the way to January 2026, a schedule normally reserved for objects that need tight tracking and extreme attention. And this is the first time ever they've selected an interstellar visitor for a mission like this. That unusual choice had people talking instantly, wondering what they're expecting to uncover. The network explained that comets can be tricky to measure because the bright halo around them can mess up the reading of the actual core, making orbit predictions shaky unless the data is collected non-stop. That explanation sounds fair enough, but it still doesn't answer why they needed a full-blown defense-level operation for it. The official line is that this is a perfect chance to practice on a fast-moving visitor. But the tone from the agencies felt way too cautious for a simple training run. And when the Minor Planet Center dropped its report, even more people started raising eyebrows. Several lines in the announcement made it clear that they wanted every telescope on the planet locked in on Atlas, watching every tiny shift in brightness or direction. And that level of attention is not normal for a simple comet. NASA kept saying Atlas isn't a threat to Earth, but their wording felt more like they were trying to calm everybody down than giving raw details. Even the European Space Agency came in with a statement about strengthening cooperation, which sounded way more political than scientific. All these careful, polished comments made people feel like something still ain't being explained. Another reason everyone paid attention is because of the network's history. Since 2017, they've only launched 8 official exercises, and every single one was tied to asteroids that either flew close to Earth or carried a tiny chance of impact. Atlas doesn't come anywhere near that category because its closest pass is way outside anything dangerous. But even with that, the network moved like they were gearing up for a real-time test, which makes it look like they're trying to learn everything they can about this object, even if they want the public to stay relaxed. Some astronomers pointed out that Atlas moves so fast that predicting its path is tough, and sure, that alone can justify heavy monitoring. But the timing still feels off. And the most interesting part? The agencies completely sidestepped the strange behavior that private researchers and independent astronomers have been talking about for months. Instead of speaking on the weird patterns in the tail and anti-tail, they kept everything super vague, sticking to generic lines about data quality and standard observations, which only made the whole thing sound even more suspicious. The agencies refusing to acknowledge the strange behavior had a lot of people whispering that maybe this training event is really just a way to collect high-resolution data without setting off panic. Interstellar objects don't follow the same long-term models we use for normal comets, so maybe the agencies are low-key worried that Atlas might flip the script and act in ways that don't match the textbooks. And as this whole exercise kicks off, the real question hanging over everything is simple. Why wait until now? If they truly believe nothing unusual is happening, then why throw this much manpower, money, and global coordination at something supposedly harmless? It doesn't add up. This is exactly why the next part of the story goes hard. Because the newest images from independent astronomers show things the agencies haven't even mentioned. So what did these pictures reveal that suddenly shifted the tone of the entire investigation? People started paying attention real fast. The new images, snapped by independent observers, instantly became the star of the conversation because they showed details NASA and the ESA completely left out. And once these pictures hit the internet, the quiet, everything's normal vibe from the agencies felt way more suspicious. The most shocking image came from MIT's Samura, who used a half-meter telescope to capture a tail stretching nearly 5 million kilometers, plus an anti-tail pushing back toward the sun like a giant cosmic blade. The size alone would be wild, but what made it even crazier was the structure. Razor clean, stable, and way too narrow compared to the wide fan shape real comets usually throw off. Instead of spreading out in a messy cloud, this tail kept a tight, perfect line across a ridiculous distance, and that had people asking what kind of force could keep something that precise in deep space. Samira's picture quickly got lined up next to shots from Peter Carson-Lele and another astronomer named Walter, and all three showed the exact same strange pattern. What really threw people off was how these independent images looked cleaner than the ones NASA released, and folks instantly started asking why everyday skywatchers were pulling in clearer visuals than massive space agencies with high-end hardware. The agencies tried to explain it by saying their equipment needed longer exposure times, but the public wasn't buying it because the independent shots stayed consistent and showed structural details that were impossible to brush off. The wildest part was the anti-tail, a bright, needle-thin column stretching over 1 million kilometers long, pointing straight at the sun like it had somewhere to be. Real dust under solar radiation should bend or drift, but this thing stayed locked in one direction as if some unknown force was holding it in place. And because all three observers captured the same shape, it made it pretty clear the structure wasn't just some glitch or camera trick. It hinted that 3I Atlas might have a pattern built inside it that lets these jets line up in stable geometry. That level of stability made people wonder if the object was reacting to sunlight in a simple, natural way, or if there was something more complicated going on behind the scenes. Normally, when a comet is shedding material at high speed, the trails come out messy and chaotic, shifting around depending on the solar wind. But these new images showed razor-sharp lines staying steady even while the object moved fast through space. Some people online said the whole thing looked like a system with a controlled flow, not random, not broken up, but clean and consistent. Even though that's still just speculation, the comparison between regular comets and Atlas made the difference impossible to ignore. The coma's brightness added even more heat to the debate because it stayed smooth and evenly lit, even though the object was traveling at extreme speed. A normal coma has uneven patches where the ice heats up and turns to gas, but Atlas showed a uniform glow with no breaks anywhere. That made some researchers think the material wasn't coming from random surface spots, but maybe from deeper layers inside the object, a process we still don't fully understand. Even astronomers who believe the object is completely natural admitted these pictures show something wildly unusual. The structures look more like organized streams instead of scattered dust. And once the images spread across the internet, the arguments got louder because everything seen in the photos clashed hard with the calm, downplayed tone used by NASA and ESA. This big mismatch between what the agencies were saying and what the independent observers were showing is exactly why the public started digging for deeper answers. And now the real question is hanging in the air. If Atlas keeps showing these sharp, precise shapes, what are the next wave of measurements going to reveal about what this thing truly is? Then came the 12th anomaly revealed by Professor Avi Loeb, and that one had everyone scratching their heads because it focused on how Atlas rotates and how its long jets behave. The concept sounds simple, but the explanation gets tricky fast. If the object spins every 16 hours like the models say, then the jets should be showing clear signs of motion, curves, arcs, or even spirals, stretching out over huge distances. A spinning object naturally throws off material in patterns that twist, and over more than 1,000,000 kilometers, those jets should look bent or blurred. But what the images showed didn't match that at all. The new images show these straight, razor-clean streams with edges so sharp they almost look engineered, and that kind of precision is impossible to ignore. Researchers were expecting at least some distortion, because sunlight heating different spots at different times should normally create messy, uneven flows. But the jets staying narrow and locked in place suggests the rotation might not match the earlier measurements at all. Professor Loeb floated the idea that the object might have slowed down since the summer, but that theory doesn't really fit what we see in natural comets. When comets release material, that outgassing usually increases their spin, which makes the curves in the jets even stronger. For Atlas to suddenly slow down like that, something would have to be acting against its rotation, and there's no simple natural process that explains that kind of braking. The whole behavior feels out of pocket, especially compared to the predictable patterns we've seen in other objects drifting through space. Another angle is that the jets might not be constant at all, but firing in short bursts from specific places on the surface. Loeb suggested a scenario where deep valleys hold patches of ice that only catch sunlight at very specific angles. And those quick moments of direct light shoot out focused streams. Sure, that could explain why the jets look so straight, but it also opens up bigger questions about Atlas's internal build. If the surface has features that allow these controlled flows, then the object might be way more solid or structured than the fragile, crumbly bodies we usually find wandering in interstellar space. A comet made from soft material shouldn't be able to support such clean, steady channels for gas release. And things get even crazier when you consider the length of the jets. A stream of material stretching over 1,000,000 kilometers needs to blast off the surface at serious speed, and under normal conditions, that kind of speed should make any change in rotation super obvious. The fact that the jets stay this clean only makes the situation even stranger. If the object was rotating even a little, the streams should bend or curve just a bit. But the images show nearly perfect straight lines, like someone drew them with a ruler. That sharp appearance had people comparing the jets to controlled exhaust instead of a natural gas release. It's still just speculation, but the way these lines mimic engineered flows has a lot of folks digging for deeper explanations. As astronomers keep studying the anomaly, the bigger question gets louder, because Atlas's rotation affects everything else it does. If the object isn't spinning the way scientists expected, then what does that say about all the other weird behavior we're seeing? And this question becomes even more serious once we look at the next strange feature: the way the anti-tail cuts straight through the solar wind like it doesn't care at all. Could this rotation mystery be the first clue that Atlas is operating under conditions that don't match anything natural? The strength of the material flowing out of 3I Atlas turned into one of the most shocking discoveries yet. The anti-tail wasn't just glowing, it was pushing directly through the solar wind, and that had astronomers stunned. Solar wind moves around 400 kilometers per second and normally bends any dust or gas from a comet backward instantly. But Atlas showed a column of material staying solid against that force. For any structure to stay that stable in an environment like that, it has to carry serious mass. And that's what led Professor Avi Loeb to run the numbers on how much material Atlas has been losing. His calculations suggest that billions of tons of matter have escaped over the last 2 months, and that number opened up a whole new round of questions. Sure, a natural comet can lose mass when the ice heats up and turns into gas, but the amount depends on how much surface area is catching the sunlight. And measurements from Hubble show that Atlas's nucleus is way too small to release this much material through normal sublimation. If the surface doesn't have the area to feed this flow, then there's no way it should be producing gas at this scale, and the anti-tail shouldn't be anywhere near this strong. But the latest observations show the complete opposite of what scientists expected. The column of dust and gas holds its shape for nearly 1,000,000 kilometers, staying tight and clean. And this huge gap between the predicted behavior and what we're actually seeing has pushed researchers to rethink what kind of process could be happening inside this thing. Professor Loeb pointed out that a technological thruster could create the same level of acceleration with way less mass loss, since a controlled exhaust shoots out faster than gas made through natural sublimation. Nobody is saying that's what it is, but the comparison shows just how tough it is to explain this anti-tail using only natural models. A regular plume should get bent backward or scattered instantly because the solar wind is basically a non-stop blast of charged particles. But Atlas keeps pushing out a column moving straight against that flow like it's nothing. That kind of behavior hints that the forces at work might not match what comets usually deal with, and that inconsistency is making the mystery even deeper. Another idea is that maybe the material blasting out is way denser than scientists expected, and heavier particles would stand stronger against the solar wind. But that explanation hits a wall too, because the spectroscopic data so far doesn't show any unusually heavy elements in the mix. Without evidence, that theory stays shaky. Some astronomers raised the possibility that Atlas might be hotter on the inside than predicted, which could let deeper layers release stronger, more focused flows. But again, the thermal readings we have right now don't confirm anything like that. Every time one explanation pops up, it opens the door to another missing piece, and the whole situation just keeps getting more complicated with each new image that drops. Right now, the next big move for researchers is getting more precise spectroscopic data, because those readings can break down the chemical fingerprints of the material and maybe finally explain how this anti-tail keeps its strength. If the next round of data shows the gas behaving like regular comet material, the mystery is only going to get deeper. And that brings us to one of the biggest moments in this whole story, the upcoming encounter with Jupiter. Because once Atlas moves into the region where Jupiter's gravity takes over, we might finally see clues that Earth-based telescopes just can't catch. The approach between 3I Atlas and Jupiter has turned into one of the most hyped events in the entire investigation. Jupiter's gravity rules a massive zone around the planet called the Hill Radius, and anything that crosses into that zone can get pulled into orbit instead of being dragged back toward the Sun. Atlas is set to pass right into that boundary on March 16, 2026, and researchers are debating whether this timing is pure coincidence or if there's a pattern hiding in plain sight. Professor Avi Loeb highlighted why this distance matters so much. If Atlas drops material or fragments while inside the Hill radius, those pieces could end up stuck in Jupiter's orbit, not drifting off into deep space. That raises major questions about whether the object contains smaller components that act differently once they break off from the main body. Because Jupiter's gravity works like a giant natural trap, this encounter gives scientists a rare shot at spotting behavior that would normally be impossible to see. NASA is even bringing out the Juno spacecraft for this, planning to use its instruments to listen for radio waves during the encounter. Juno's antenna will scan everything from 50 Hz to 40 MHz, frequencies that could pick up electrical activity or strange patterns that hint at controlled processes inside the object. Now, picking up signals like that wouldn't prove anything by itself, but it would definitely crack the door open for even deeper investigation. And NASA isn't the only one locked in. The European Space Agency is stepping in too, with its JUICE mission keeping a close watch as Atlas approaches Jupiter's reach. The JUICE mission has already snapped its first early looks at Atlas, even though we won't actually get that data until early 2026 because the transmission speeds are slow. That delay has only made people even more curious, especially the ones who've been tracking this object's strange moves for months. Some astronomers think this Jupiter encounter could finally show whether Atlas reacts to changes in gravitational pressure, and that reaction might expose hidden clues about what the object is really made of. If Atlas suddenly shifts direction or brightness while inside Jupiter's Hill radius, ground-based observatories will catch it instantly. Every possible outcome adds another twist to the story, and the encounter is already being called one of the most important moments in the entire investigation. As Atlas keeps moving closer to Jupiter, the real question is getting louder. If this object keeps breaking the rules, what will the next gaps in the data tell us about what's really being kept from the public? The lack of clear updates from the major space agencies has become one of the most unsettling pieces of the whole 3I Atlas situation. Every missing update or delayed report sparks even more questions. NASA and the European Space Agency have released only small bits of info, and most of what they say feels more like reassurance than real detail. People were expecting crisp images, exact measurements, and heavy analysis. But instead, only a handful of official observations have been shared. And the silence becomes even harder to ignore when independent astronomers keep posting detailed pictures showing structures the agencies still haven't talked about. That difference in transparency has a lot of viewers wondering if the agencies are simply being extra cautious, or if they're choosing not to say certain things on purpose. The JUICE mission added another twist to this mystery because it already captured early observations of Atlas. Yet none of that data will reach Earth until 2026 thanks to slow transmission speeds. And with everything that's been happening, people can't help but question why the biggest missions only seem to deliver the slowest answers. Even though the delay with JUICE has a technical explanation, it still sparks speculation because the timing feels off. By the time the data finally reaches Earth, Atlas will already have blown past its closest point to us, making the info way less useful for real-time studying. That's why some researchers are comparing this situation to earlier moments of weird silence, like when Oumuamua drifted through and we barely got any data, or when Voyager picked up those confusing signals that nobody explained for years. Back then, long stretches with limited information created waves of public uncertainty. And now the same pattern is showing up with Atlas. These missing details also mess with how scientists interpret the object's behavior, because without consistent measurements, a lot of predictions become almost impossible to confirm. People watching this closely have noticed changes in brightness, rotation, and tail structure between observations, and with no official updates filling the gaps, nobody can tell whether these shifts are normal or something way more unusual. Some astronomers think the agencies might be waiting until they have stronger evidence before making any big statements. But others argue that staying quiet only makes the whole thing look more suspicious. Atlas is moving fast and showing features that don't match any comet we've seen before, so the lack of frequent updates makes the whole investigation feel unfinished and incomplete. Because of these gaps, people are relying more on independent astronomers to keep the story alive, and that only makes the contrast between official silence and amateur reports even sharper. These missing pieces give everything a slightly unsettling vibe, almost like the major agencies are bracing for results that might challenge the usual explanations. And as more people ask why key data still isn't being shared, the mystery keeps deepening. If this silence continues, the big question becomes, what might the next chapter of Atlas reveal that the public hasn't been shown yet? That's why the closest approach on December 19, 2025 is such a major moment. It's the best opportunity astronomers have to study this thing up close and see what's really going on, even though Atlas will still be around 270 million kilometers away during its closest approach. That distance is perfect for telescopes to finally grab the cleanest measurements of its entire journey. Scientists are lining up this window to study its light spectrum, heat patterns, and the exact makeup of its tail. And these results could finally answer the big question: is Atlas acting like a normal comet, or is it doing something way more unusual? Spectroscopy is going to be the star of the show because it reveals the chemical fingerprint of whatever is escaping from the surface. This method can tell instantly whether the gas matches what we see in ordinary sublimation. But if the readings show unexpected elements or odd ratios, the entire understanding of this object could flip overnight. Astronomers are also hoping to measure the heat coming from the nucleus because temperature gives real clues about what's happening inside. A typical comet only gets warm from sunlight, but if Atlas shows any extra heat, that might hint at more complex activity deep in its structure. These tests sound simple, but predicting the results is almost impossible because Atlas has already shattered expectations again and again. The brightness of the tail is another major focus point because the glow reveals how much material is blasting off the surface, and that flow affects the object's direction and speed. If the tail shifts shape during the closest approach, that change could show how Atlas reacts to stronger sunlight hitting its structure. A natural comet usually throws off scattered, messy patterns, but Atlas has been flexing narrow, perfectly stable lines for months now, and that contrast makes the upcoming measurements even more crucial. Ground-based observatories are going to zoom in on every small detail because even tiny changes might reveal information that can't be detected from any other angle or distance. For a lot of researchers, this closest approach is the final big test before Atlas drifts deeper into the outer system. Once it moves away, the shot at collecting high-quality data might not come back again, and that urgency puts even more pressure on this moment. Anyone following the story knows this is the point that could finally show whether Atlas fits inside natural models, or if it keeps breaking every expectation scientists have for anything coming from another star. And as all the new data gets closer, one question sits right at the center of the mystery. If Atlas isn't acting like a normal comet, then what are these next measurements really about to reveal about its true identity? The story of 3I Atlas has now reached its biggest turning point, because every anomaly, every strange pattern, and every delayed update hints that something way more complex might be unfolding right in front of us. The 5 million-kilometer tail, the rotation drama, the wild strength of the anti-tail, and the quiet gaps from the major agencies, all of it points toward an object that refuses to match any natural model we've ever seen. And now, as we wait for the next round of hard data, we're left staring at a choice. Do we settle for the simple explanation, or do we look deeper into the unknown? So tell me, what do you think Atlas really is? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, subscribe to the StellarDrift channel, share the video, and I'll see you on the next one.